Anyone who wants to speak, well, while we are discussing, of course, feel free to make your request. So,
I think we can start now, Abhi. Uh,
go on, go ahead.
Yes, welcome everyone again to the localized series of Bharat Pacific podcast. We are continuing with our series of reviewing Modi 2.0's foreign policy agenda region wise one by one. In the first part, we covered India's neighborhood. In the second part, we covered Indo Pacific, including China. We discussed China a bit in the second part, a bit in the first part. Of course, we will keep on discussing China in every regional part because it is very consequential in every regional relations for India. So today we are continuing with the third part, and today's topic will be Modi 2.0 in West Asia. How was Modi government's second term in its diplomacy with West Asia? Especially considering the fact that it has, against everyone's expectations, against continue to punch above its weight when it comes to geopolitics. So there is that. Uh, so, Rishabh, let's start with you. Can you summarize how was West Asian diplomacy of Modi government under Modi 2.0? Hello, Rishabh, are you there?
You can unmute yourself if possible, yeah.
Then Abhi, let's start with you until Rishabh comes back.
Yeah.
Uh, let's summarize Modi 2.0's West Asian diplomacy
Uh-huh.
uh, in couple of minutes for our listeners.
Sure. See, I mean, first of all, West Asia is very integral, but if we remember the non-aligned era, um, the non-aligned period, the problem was that our engagement with countries in West Asia was very half-hearted. It was not clear. It was half-baked, right? I mean, there are reasons, but it was not happening in a proper way. But when under the leadership of Bharat Ratna Narasimha Rao, PV Narasimha Rao, sorry, when he actually made the way for India-Israel relations. And obviously, on the Palestine issue, we all know that India has had made its position clear in the 1940s, late 1940s. Um, one thing is one thing became clear in the last 30 years, and under this leadership in the last 10 years, that they have actually opened up a lot of avenues with West Asia on three important fronts. First is definitely strategic, because without that, because Pakistan had to be countered, and then creating its own strategic presence in the so-called South Asian region, beyond obsessing with Pakistan and the issues with Pakistan. That's something which was necessary. I think they have started to do, and the pace has been pretty much fine. Um, Second is obviously economic and developmental based, which is to say, yes, um, partnering with Dubai, partnering with Riyadh, partnering with Jerusalem or Tel Aviv, whatever we say, I think it has been fruitful, um, because we know that the Iran Saudi rapprochement benefits both China and India. So, even in that case, while the US is in a kind of a cusp right now, and uh, it's kind of frustrated due to the Biden administration's policy and the way the establishment is not able to handle. India and China both have been able to manage it pretty well. And even in BRICS and SCO, we have seen this aspirants. I think we have even discussed in the past. I think in the space, Rishabh was also there. We had discussed about Shanghai Cooperation Organization and region. So overall, it has been great. But then what's next? Because if the Abraham Accords is not moving forward, we don't know if it will or not, due to whatever is happening with Hamas in Israel and what's happening with the Houthis in Yemen. We still have to see what's going to unfold further, right? So I'm not going to completely say we have reverted back to the pre-Abrahamic Accords times. That what all the efforts by Netanyahu, who obviously who was also responsible in certain things, Prince Salman and Trump, have completely failed. I'm not going to say that, but what I'll say is that obviously it's a kind of a fidgeting situation for India, that is which will be there. Will India will India deny its future funding to UNRWA for Palestine? We don't know. Uh, while the Western nations have done it. So these are the aspects I think which we should discuss tonight, and hopefully Rishabh would add more, and I think Yus will also join, and I will also add perspectives. So yeah,
Rishabh, now are you back?
you can, yeah.
Yeah. So Rishabh, let's start with the most contentious part of the West Asian relationship under Modi 2.0, that is Israel. Now, Modi 2.0 began with very on positive note when it comes to Israel, in the sense that, of course, India-Israel bilaterals were also in a very sweet spot. But again, Trump, because of Abraham Accords, and created a pathway for Israel to be accommodated in the larger neighborhood, right? That was in the beginning of Modi 2.0. But when it comes to Modi, end of the Modi 2.0, that seems to be not the case. Even as our bilateral relationship continues to be on a very good path, there are some challenges now compared to the beginning. How do you think the trajectory has gone for Israel? Of course, in the neighborhood, and how does India fit into it? Because a lot of the Indian engagement in the region, be it maybe Indo-Abrahamic Accords or a lot of trilaterals, multilaterals in West Asia, were centered around by keeping Israel at the focus. That's why this emphasis.
Hi guys. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, yes, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I think Israel was a part of, or India was a part of, the wider changes that was happening in the region. And you're right that overall the normalization of ties between Israel and the Gulf or Arab countries did, help India, or at least there was expectation that the wider process will be beneficial to India, which has over the years, especially under the current dispensation, built ties and deepened cooperation in a way that was uh, not expected, or at least the pace of the same was not anticipated. So obviously there was a wider expectation that this can work in India's favor, but I would say that it's not as if even at that time there were no challenges in the context of the widening gap that was already visible vis-a-vis Iran and other countries. So you have the Israel and then Gulf nations led by Saudi Arabia, who were getting closer, or at least who were, understanding or maybe talking about the threat of Iran and its proxies across the region, which I think also had created a problem for India in terms of balancing ties between Riyadh and Tehran, right? So there was also a important aspect there, and I think some very often we downplay the importance of Iran in the region as well, considering the fact that more and more polarization of interests in West Asia also means that Iran goes further into the camp that is slowly emerging, not entirely obviously there yet, but there is a sense that there is a polarization in terms of Russia, China, Pakistan axis of sort emerging, although obviously it's overdone, but at least in security wise, in military terms and wider cooperation, these three seems to be on the back foot, considering the amount of Western pressure that exists on these countries. So there was always, I think, a concern, even in the early years, about how India would navigate through this. We've already seen how India's oil imports from these countries took a big hit, and it can have consequences as to as to how fast or quick the infrastructure projects, etc. Move. We've seen Chabahar port, although obviously the problems there go way beyond. I mean, even though there is some willingness, there are issues with regards to financing and other stuff which comes into the picture. But yeah, there was essentially challenges, which I think Indian thinkers and experts kind of tend to underplay. I mean, it is only in the recent weeks and months when you've seen Houthis openly targeting, Indian vessels or vessels which have a lot of Indian servicemen or people working on. You see that there has to be some question asked as to how much goodwill does India have left with Iran. And I think the government recognizes that in terms of how they've approached the relationship in the last year at least. But you're right that there is another emerging challenge in terms of the widening gap between Israel and some of the other countries in the Gulf because of what's happening in Gaza. And I think although it seems like a challenge, I still feel that there is a lot of appetite for normalization in all countries. Uh, you see that in terms of rhetoric, UAE and Saudi Arabia have been fairly responsible, in my opinion, when it comes to talking about, and very fair, I would say also, when talking about Gaza and what needs to be done. And in many ways, India, as much as people would like to sensationalize the issue, India has quite more or less been has stuck to what it's always done. It obviously, because of the unprecedented nature of the attack on Israel, it called out the terrorism bit, which may seem like a departure, but I don't think it is. It seems like a continuation. And I mean, as most of you already know, there is no parallel to what happened on that day in Israel. So obviously, it's very difficult for people to, compare it to some other attack because there is no parallel in history. So I think India did what it did, not just because of how it sees Israel in general, but I think it did what it did because it saw also uh, how there are some similarities, how India faces those threats as well. So I think India would have done so regardless. And obviously, there is a danger. People can make an argument that there is a danger that India should not get dragged into this conflict or be seen to be picking a side. But I think India has over the years, especially in this conflict also, we've kind of maintained a very fair and reasonable stance, reiterating the things regarding settlement, etc., which goes against international law in general. But at the same time, I mean, sending aid as well. But at the same time, also talking about backing Israel when it comes to Hamas and Hamas's activity on the border. So I don't think that, even though there is a challenge, the challenge is not there just for India alone, right? It's not unique in that sense. Many countries are facing those challenges, and I think the more, other countries, specifically the Western world, they have also had a very huge loss of face. So in my opinion, India is also in a good place because it has a lot of goodwill with Israel, the government and the people in general. And at the same time, it has maintained, and I would say it is still increasing uh, its cooperation, or the length and breadth of the cooperation with the Gulf countries. And at the same time, it has somehow managed to keep Israel also, at least, Israel, sorry, Iran on its side to some extent, where Iran seems to be at least not going out of its way to harm Indian interests. But obviously, that is something which can be a problem.
On the
Uh,
contrary, I was very surprised this week when I saw Iran has opened like the free visa scheme for Indians for 15 days. I
yeah,
was like, what?
yeah, exactly. Something I think of softening of approach is happening, and although I think that they would probably want, they would have probably done that regardless. But I do think that in the last couple of years there was some irritation in Tehran as to, if India can imagine, if India can go out of its way to get Russian oil, uh, and resist that pressure and whatnot. Many in Iran were actually saying the same about why can't India do the same with Iranian oil, where the world pressure or global pressure, and in terms of the harm it can do to your reputation, etc. Is fairly less. And I mean, again, also in terms of transportation costs, in terms of Indian refineries, both private and government, being familiar to the to the kind of oil you get exported, you can export from Iran, it's different. Obviously, so one can argue that uh, Iranian oil has been under more severe or restriction, or is it been under a much more bigger scrutiny, and that probably plays a part in the decision taken by Indian refineries, especially private players. They don't want to get, because the sanctions there, also the gamut of sanctions is quite huge. So I get that, but I think in general, I think the government has done well. The only challenge, I think, the bigger challenge would be, I think, to not get involved further. I mean, I know everybody wants India to take a stance, and some people think we are leaning too far on the Israel side. The others, somehow, some others feel, India is being too sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. Maybe we should, revisit our principal position. But I think India is navigating those things quite well for now. Um, if there is more polarization of interest, unfortunately, and that's the harsh reality, India cannot do much beyond, taking a side. And I don't think India should take a side, especially if the conflict escalates. And I think at that moment of time, as in the past, India's main concern would be its own diaspora, its own working force, its own people who are essentially staying and working there in this region, which is absolutely huge. So right now, I think India wants obviously some sort of, you know, um, essentially some de-escalation of sorts, which has happened in many ways, if you think about it. But yeah, I think overall the approach has worked well, but there are challenges when it comes to keeping Iran close. Um, and yes, you're right, but about what Israel and the others, the normalization process taking a back step or one step back, that could be a challenge, but I don't think it will reach to a place where India will have to pick sides, unless obviously India does that by itself. So
But Abhivardhan, coming back to you, India's position on the current conflict has been perhaps one of the most matured ones, right? There are three layers to it. The first being India genuinely recognizes, and it has been our long lasting policy that uh, two state solution is the only way to go in the region, and Palestinians have the right to their own state, basically. That's the first consistent policy India has always maintained. However, in continuation to that second policy that we maintain that we, we do not recognize any terror activities towards the formation of two-state solution. Diplomacy is the only way, and any kind of justification of terror activities in pursuit of that goal is not recommended, or we do not actually encourage. Basically, we in fact condemn in harsh terms. And the third layer to it is, despite these despite we recognizing two-state solution, India in its own interest has not stopped diplomacy with Israel and will continue to pursue its national interest, and it will not let community-based international solidarity, uh, it will not let India's strategic interest as a hostage to religious solidarity, internationalist religious solidarity, or community solidarity. So perhaps this India's position on the Israel and Palestine is perhaps one of the most layered, matured ones, if I'm not wrong. I don't think any other country has such a layered approach to the region.
Right. And we welcome yous as well. Thank you for coming. And so I will be just quick.
Or,
um,
or let use answer this question. Did you hear the full question?
let him do it. Let him do it. If he's able to, yeah, please. Please
Did you
feel
hear
free
the
to.
full question, use?
No, I didn't. Could you just repeat it for me?
Yeah, so we started with the West Asian thing with the India's position on Israel and current Israel thing, and how Israel in the region started with like on a positive note during the beginning of Modi 2.0, and by the end of the Modi 2.0, the situation has got a pretty messy in the region. In this backdrop, Rishabh has spoken somewhat, and as a follow up, I have asked the question that India is one of the most matured policies on the issue. First, it has it recognizes two-state solution as a long-lasting continuous policy of Indian government, irrespective of the governments. Two, despite that, we never recognize, or in fact, we condemn in harsh words the terrorism as a means to achieve that goal. And third, uh, despite this, we never let our strategic interest or national interest be hostage to the idea of two-state solution or the internationalist religious solidarity of Muslims, basically, or Islamists. I would say Islamists, not Muslims. Islamists would be the right word.
And what's the question?
Yeah, I mean, under Modi 2.0, we have continued that, and we have cautiously and carefully treaded that path uh, without how would I put, we have maintained the well balanced approach in the region without hurting anyone, is what I would like to say.
Yes, but I think that also goes to the posture we have long maintained in regards to doing anything more kinetic in the region, right? So if you generally look at India's disposition since NDA 1, which is the 2014 start of Modi's era, which is referring to Modi's first term in power, we maintain friendships with everyone, and we are content to do things on the margins, right? Things that won't sort of offend some of the other key players we are friends with. Hint, hint, it's Iran. But that's about it. That being said, as structural forces continue to bear down upon us, and India's own strategic mindset evolves, right? As I've written about this before, over the medium to long term, if India does develop expeditionary powers and goes down that route, and there's quite a bit of historical precedence for this, um, will the relationships that we see now remain that way? Now, I understand, of course, this is so far into the future. We are basically spitballing and speculating. But I just thought my contribution to this uh, this specific part of the conversation would be that uh, the current praise that we are accorded vis-a-vis maturity, I think, has a lot to do with the fact that we aren't as involved as some of the other powers, right? So, for example, if you look at Yemen as an example, sure, we do anti-piracy operations, and we get a lot of positive publicity from said operations. But if you will never find India say we're going to put a permanent end to this menace. because the natural solution to such a problem would be the invasion of Yemen, right? You contrast this to what the two other West Asian powerhouses have done. I'm talking of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates here, and they've got their fingers in all sorts of military pies, right? They're sort of notorious, not notorious. Uh, it's a well-known fact that they fund their own militias all around West Asia and even North Africa, right, as far as Sudan. So how far this position is maintained over the medium to long term will be interesting to watch. But yes, I do agree with you that uh, from 2014 onwards, especially since 2019, our policy in West Asia has been perhaps the most mature of all the countries.
Uh, Continuing with that, Rishabh, but do you think, for instance, now after the war has started, Indian laborers filling up for the gaps for uh, uh, Palestine laborers who used to exist in Israel, do those kind of economic issues actually hurt long-time interests of India when it comes to Palestine or any other neighbor allies in the region, basically?
I don't know. I am somebody who doesn't understand what's the outrage here about. Like, I mean, domestically, I don't see why it's such a big issue, considering the fact that if people are not being forced to do so, I think it's a free country in the sense that if people want to take up those jobs, which clearly there are many people in those country, and obviously you can make the argument about why that's the case, etc., etc. But the ultimate point remains that if people want to go there to do those jobs, I think that's their wish, right? Indian government merely has a mobility pact with them. Indian government is not forcing them to do so, right? If Israel wants more labor and it has reached out to contractors, etc., and it is able to garner that much of, labor force from India, which is willing and able to do that job, I think that's none of our concern, and I don't think that will lead to that much of an issue per se. I mean, we have Indian workers probably in worse condition in many of the Arab countries as well. So I don't see what's the point there. But in general, I think India, as you pointed out, I think we've done quite well. Um, as I said before, the fact that the biggest challenge, yeah, I mean, I think he wants to add something. You want to add something?
Yeah, very quickly. I'm sorry I took so much time to respond, but the to your first point, when you were asking, you don't see what the outrage is about. I think that's due in large part because a lot of the criticism that's coming isn't really sound. It's sort of being used as a stick to beat the present government with, which is it's a
Yeah, which is
rhetorical
fine.
device of
Which is fine. Which is, I mean, I
No, no,
understand,
but
but it
like
has.
my question was, yes,
Mhm.
domestically criticism fine, but even
Ah,
international,
exactly. Yeah.
even
No, but
international.
I don't see how it will impact. I really don't think that the UAE government or even the Palestinians for that matter, unless and I mean, in the fact that India has backed a two-state solution, the fact that India continues to vote against is illegal Israeli settlements, etc. All of that, I don't think the Palestinians would really care about if the fact that 100, 1,000 or like 2,000 Indian workers go to Israel and work in various factors, by the way. Not these are not all the jobs are not essentially in agricultural or what you call hard labor per se. So I don't think it will have a broader impact on how countries view India and its policies, because I think there are larger things at stake and most people understand that. So as much as people in India would like to make it an issue, I don't think it is. And I think with regards to West Asia, I think as the last 2 years have been, the evidence is out there that, in India, all sides kind of exaggerate the impact that some domestic issues can have on the wider policy and bilateral ties. Again, I like to remind this again and again, but a large part of our expert class essentially said that the India's relation with the West Asian countries, especially the Gulf nations, would essentially collapse because of the whole Nimpu Sharma episode and the whole blasphemy thing. That did not happen because I mean these are very small things in the larger scheme of things. So there's a tendency in India for people to overread into situations a bit too much in terms of consequences. So I think overall, the fact that I just pointed out that India has good ties with Israel. At the same time, it has a principled position and continues to back the legitimate cause of the two-state solution, which I think most of the world sees as a viable response, including many Israelis. I think India is in a safe spot, in I would say in the right spot as well. We don't need to, as I said, go and take a particular stand on this. Obviously, we would like to help in de-escalation, but as I said before, I don't think India has that much pull for us to have any kind of um, say in this, and I think that's not a bad thing either. Considering there are so many issues involved, so many different interests, domestic, regional, and obviously coming from other powers as well. So the fact that other powers, because of the fact, I mean, think about it. I mean, let's be fair. And again, as most of you know, uh, I am not a, I can be a vocal critic of the United States as well. But I think even the United States, even while it's trying to balance and try to placate both sides, it is now getting caught up in between and losing goodwill in the region like we haven't seen before. So sometimes even if it tries to do the right thing, it doesn't really come across as that. And I think that's a lesson for some of us who would like to, us to uh, placate our own constituencies domestically. Uh, we don't have to do that. We don't have to do that moral grandstanding, or obviously lean into too much into the whole idea of Israel India relation. I think all of that can be handled separately without us jumping into a gun and entering domains which we don't need to. So I think overall, as you pointed out, I think we have done things handle things pretty well. The only concern for me, and something which doesn't get talked about, is how we are handling Iran and the balance there, because I think that will be a bigger challenge for us. As I said, if, for example, there's more polarization towards this Russia, China, Iran axis, I think there could be some trouble there. Obviously, recently we've seen some slight tension between Iran Pakistan, but as I said, that's not consequential per se long term. But still, the fact that remains is that ultimately we also, I mean, as much as we would like to be think about a security in terms of maritime postures and perspective as well. Ultimately, we also have to see about the land threats and what is happening in the larger Eurasian landmass. I think sometime it's because it's not as, I don't know, maybe it's not as glamorous to study those developments. I think we should not miss what happens in that part of the world as well, and the ties that we have with all these countries, because ultimately we have to live in this region, right? I mean, it's easy for people to pontificate from Western world about what India should do regarding Iran. But yeah, I think that is perhaps the bigger challenge here, rather than the whole fall or the breakdown of the normalization process between Israel and the Gulf.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, very quickly on the Iran point, I did want to bring this up because I find it quite interesting, and I think it's also it's been a point of concern for me for a while. Because of the sort of internal churn you see within the Iranian regime, right? So protests to it ranging across different issues, um, and then it gets suppressed, and then it sort of dies down, and then it kicks back up again. There's sort of been this trend where a lot of people who should know better have adopted this mindset of, oh, the Iranian regime is stable, right? Like, I understand the point. Not every single uprising is going to lead to the destabilization of the Iranian regime, their eventual overthrow, and the coming of something new. I understand that point, but I do think we need a lot of people in this space need to appreciate the fact that it will only take one such event, right, to reach its logical conclusion for the entire pack of cards to come falling down. And when that happens, while a lot of people like to think that it may be very good for India, I'm talking of certain quarters here, not the majority of the commentariat. Uh, it will prove to be quite destabilizing for us as well, because the implications will not all be good. right? When a power as big as Iran, right? And I say big here, not in the sense of economy. I say big here in terms of the asymmetric kinetic capability that they've brought to the table, which is like a very fancy way of saying they have a lot of proxies, right? So when the big daddy is gone, all of these proxies suddenly become their own masters. And when they suddenly become their own masters, you will start seeing that have a knock-on effect on West Asia as well. Because when you look at the influence operations and when I say influence operations, I mean kinetic influence operations that Iran runs all across the sphere, right? Sometimes within India itself, people forget this. Um, it is going to it is a very valid point to sort of dwell upon and think through what our contingencies are. So in the case that it does occur, right, worst case scenario, it has occurred, what is going to be India's response in this situation?
In addition to that, use I have another question regarding India's approach to Iran. Of course, we have always had like the very incrementalist approach to Iran, despite many things not going good between both the nations. We have maintained decent level of diplomatic relations. However, does India have any opinion or anything to say about the new axis of terror, or like the uh, pa- paramilitary organizations, whatever you call? I would say terror organizations that Iran has built up in the region, in the form of Houthis, Hamas, etc., Hezbollah. Does India have any policy or opinion on that? How to deal with that aspect of Iran, or do we care or do we not care? Like, in addition to whatever you have spoken, like, because I do think now Iran has become a really serious rogue actor in the region. Like,
I think just a small thing to add. Iran has always been rogue actor in the region. It's just now become a more successful and a more powerful, actually powerful rogue actor in the region. I think it is for this reason that many people in India. I mean, I personally have read and written about Iran, some of its domestic problems also. I don't see the regime being as insecure, I mean, it's fairly secure. Obviously, it's an insecure regime in general, but it's very secure in terms of its position. It's the consolidation that it has, the how it has rallied people around it, and obviously that it is very unpopular when it comes to certain issues. And because of I don't know how many of you remember the maximum pressure campaign or Iran, which Donald Trump initiated. It did lead to a lot of hardships in Iran, and there was a lot of resentment against the ayatollahs there. But I think overall, the regime within the country and outside the country and region, it's absolutely uh, secure. It's stable. The relationship it has with proxies, not just in Lebanon with Hezbollah and Hamas and others, but also in Iraq and Syria, is absolutely huge. And some of this goes beyond Shia groups, right? So again, if you're talking about India and the West Asian, its approach to West Asia, you cannot ignore Iran and what is happening with Iran as well. As great as you know our relationship, and as crucial as the relationship is with the UAE and other countries when it comes to economic cooperation, I think we'll also touch upon IMEC or the Middle East corridor in a while. But I would say that in terms of security issues, Iran is probably, I would say, after Israel, second most important person or player in the region. So I don't see how we could, afford to alienate Iran also after a point. It will become very crucial. So
I mean, that's why, I mean, my personal take on this matter is India's space increasingly in West Asia will come to be the sort of middle ground between the West Asian powerhouses. Sorry, I keep using that term again and again, but basically the United Arab Emirates and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, as well as Iran. So we'll sort of be the uh, not exactly the mediator, because that's not the correct word, but that sort of a player who tells both parties, you know what, guys, let's maybe take a chill pill. It may not
yeah,
occur right now, but as
yeah,
India's stature grows, it's quite natural because we maintain our
and
relationship with the regime. At the same
as
time, we maintain our relationship with them.
Yeah, and as I mean, it's I don't know if this point can get misconstrued, but the more isolated Iran becomes when it comes to the Western world, and same obviously with Russia and others. People always tend to think that that's always going to be bad for India. Uh, yes, obviously there could be pitfalls and challenges, but at the same time, it also gives or puts the emphasis on for Iran and others to maintain better relations with India, because that is seen as a gateway to the larger Western world, or the larger, the fact that India is seen as some sort of a responsible power, which has good ties with majority of the countries across the globe. India is then seen as one of those countries that you will have by your side. If not, then at least you would not like to alienate them as well. So the more the relations between Iran and the West deteriorate, Iran would also place importance to not let the India relationship also go down further, which I think works out well for us in many ways. I think, see, same thing with Israel as well. One thing that probably the United States, United States, in terms of its military supplies and backing of Israel, has been quite steadfast, but it's becoming very unpopular at home. And obviously, you can argue that that's also partly because of how the Israel government is approaching the issue. What are they saying about the issue? But at the same time, I would say that once you have a United States becoming more critical of you, conditioning their support, etc., etc., a very natural thing for any country, whether it's on that side of the issue or this side of the issue, is to also maintain, or at least have decent relations with India, countries like India, because probably on the diplomatic level or in general, they cannot then afford to alienate us further. So we still have that leverage, especially when things go wrong as well.
Now we have addressed Israel, then Iran. Now let's come to the other player in the region who surprisingly, at least the media has been surprisingly quite muted in the last few months. That is Turkey. Now, in the last 5 years, we have seen an interesting development vis-a-vis Turkey from Modi government, right? We have strengthened our relations with Cyprus. We are now seeing quite a strong strategic engagement with Greece, and this is happening with quite frequent visits. It's these seem to be not some one-off things. Uh, but is there any kind of opening you see with Turkey for the Modi government? Because I think in the last 6 to 12 months, Turkey seems to have gone mute. Of course, it had like the few years ago, it had the ambitions of being the third pole to the Saudi Arabia and Iran of being a leader of the Ummah. And you saw Qatar and even Pakistan under Imran Khan trying to flirt with that idea. But I think Mahathir Mohamad also encouraged that idea when Malaysia was under him. But everything has gone down the drain, right? That has not worked. And you see Erdogan winning with lesser majority. Somehow we don't hear much anymore in the last 6 to 8 months about him. Abhivardhan, would you like to add, first address this?
I'll be quick on Turkey, although I would suggest that we should discuss Qatar as well. I think we will do. But I think Erdogan is kind of biding his time because Turkey will try to engage with India on, aspects of infrastructure and development indirectly, and that's something they will try to do. But at a strategic level, again, see, in agreement, complete agreement with Rishabh, I think, of course, there's a chance that the so-called Pakistan, China, Russia axis, which might include Iran, I don't know. I'm not saying it's going to happen. It might be a possibility, right? We don't know about it. But, you know, China is trying too hard to, for Iran to get in its, axis. But if we look at the larger equation, Turkey also is a country which might fit with China and Russia, right? With Iran, it's a different situation. I'm not going to comment on it. And there were some understanding. There was some understanding that it might be the case in the coming future. But then again, if you look at the situation with Israel and Hamas, if you look at the Houthi situation in Yemen, if you look at the Ukraine situation, um, countries like Turkey and China were expecting something like, okay, fine. Yes, it's affecting American presence, it's affecting Israel, it's affecting countries of Europe. Yes, but to, so that they get their advantage. We remember how Turkey, you know, took advantage to get certain deals with Europeans and Americans, only to get certain only to get certain European countries into NATO, right? Um, so in that regard, first of all, Turkey is definitely biding time. It's not getting into a complete, I would say, extreme mode or ecstatic mode. That's what I would all say. But uh, but I think their being mum is also because of their own inter-regional aspects when it comes to Syria and Iraq and many other things. So their economy is also not doing well. We know that. So their biding time makes sense to me. But yeah, I think you can add and Rishabh can add first maybe.
Before you both come in, I would also have to put this in the context that in the last 1 year we have seen Turkey becoming more muted on its. I mean, it behaved like a spoiled child or like a internal rebel with the Western Bloc. But now even those tantrums seem to have been muted. Turkey is cooperating on all major issues with West. In the last few months, it has voted in favor of Sweden being part of NATO. It is not agitating over Ukraine, opening talks to accede EU. It has somehow been muted. Earlier, it wanted to be a so-called neutral player in Ukraine-Russian war. Now it doesn't seems to be so. Like Turkey, like in between few years, whatever Turkey tried to do, it has given up on that. And during those years, India has tried to build a very strong partnership with Greece and Cyprus also. I think it will continue with Greece and Cyprus. But do you think is there an opening to mellow down, or like is there an opening to re-engage with Turkey again for India?
So before Rishabh adds in, and just be very quick on Cyprus and Greece, I think it remains to be seen because first of all, Greece is definitely Southern Europe, and um, it will it be a gateway in a strategic sense? Yes, it's kind of a counter approach, which is definitely going to be helpful, but it's yet to be seen. Maybe on a maritime basis also. So I'll just add that much, but I'll let Rishabh
Yeah,
continue. So
and to add Armenian thing, I think that chapter is closed now, but we did lose that. But yes, Rishabh.
I don't think we lost that. I think we already knew that. I mean, militarily, we will never be able to support a side to an extent that it will tip the balance of power. And the balance of power is really, really um, skewed in one, on one side. So I think most of us already knew. But good that you brought that up. We'll pick on that a bit later. But I don't think Turkey backed down or accepted the demands or has gone mellow suddenly. I think Turkey also backed down because it got the things that it had demanded or asked for, in the sense that the accession of Sweden to NATO, some of the mellowing down on Ukraine has also happened because it has made deals with Sweden on on the Kurdish groups. It has also, as we've seen recently, I think it has made some progress with the Americans on weapon systems, etc. There have also been, some concession made to Turkey uh, in terms of the mellowing down from the rhetoric from the Western side on the domestic environment and whatnot. But at the same time, when it comes to mellowing, there has been you are right that in the sense that there's been uh, you know some of their reading is also based on where the war is going in general. So obviously they have tried to balance the interest in both places. They've also stood up to Russia when they have to, not shying away from supporting one side or the other when it comes to specific issues. But I think when it comes to the whole India thing, which I think is a little bit divorced from one side or this Russia-Ukraine war, I think one thing is true that they are very confident of themselves, and they have a lot of you know uh, they have a lot of belief in their own power, their place in the world. But I wouldn't say that just because the rhetoric on Kashmir or with ties with Pakistan has gone a bit, out of the public eye, that's changed. I would say that some of it is also a function of how people see Pakistan right now in the context of, the
But Rishabh, my point is just not that, right? Erdogan no more wants to be the leader of Ummah. That has fundamentally changed.
That's absolutely not true. If you A lot of people don't know about this, and but there is something called as the Organization of Turkic States, and these countries do talk about issues not just in the terms of their Turkish ancestry, etc., or the wider Turkic legacy of these Turkey groups, but they also articulate their place in the world, in the region, in the context of religion and the Ummah as well. And let me be very honest, and let's also remember that one of the places that our favorite neighbor in recent times, the newly elected Maldivian government and the president Mizu, one of the places that he decided to go in before India, by the way, was Turkey. And I'm not saying that this was something like an adverse situation, but if you read some of the things that were said, if you read, for example, the joint statements and whatnot, they essentially had a lot of reference to the Islamic solidarity and whatnot. How, for example, the cooperation between two countries has to be anchored in the religious commonality principles, and obviously it was also the emphasis was also on the same with regards to Gaza and whatnot. I would not agree that it has somehow given up on becoming the leader. It does invoke the Ummah. It does invoke the broader cultural religious solidarity when it comes to these issues. And I don't think just because on social media and other places you see less, prickly rhetoric on
Okay,
Kashmir, etc.
let me put it in a
So
different way. Has it at least toned down its tone?
I don't think it's the correct way for us to think about issue. I think in general states don't change or change their tact based on last what has happened in the last few months. I don't think we should frame it like that. So what I will say is when I was searching and researching on what the Central Asian countries are up to, I would urge everybody else to look at some of the organization. For example, this particular organization called the OTS, the Organization of Turkic States, which essentially is an organization that came in the mid 2000s, with Kazakhstan and other countries in Central Asia leading the front with Turkey. And it was very interesting for me to see that how some of the Central Asian countries are coalescing around, you know, uh, recently when we had all these debates about SEOs and whatnot, a lot of people talked about how, obviously there's a debate uh, about how whether India should be in these, institutions or not, considering their seniors being Chinese dominated and whatnot. And there was a lot of talk about how India should have its own, um, efforts, maybe not in terms of organization, but maybe platforms and whatnot, where India could specify or talk about India's shared history with the Central Asian states and whatnot. That is not being done by countries like India. But guess what? The scale of it, how Turkey is involved there, and not just in the last 1 year, but last 4 5 years, is absolutely breathtaking. So in terms of, I mean, obviously it doesn't reach to us because I mean, anything about Central Asia is very marginal to our discourse to begin with. But something like the OTS and what they are trying to do, the leadership that they're trying to project, even there, right, at the time when you have Russia's influence going down, and at the same time, China obviously leading from the front on the economic aspects and others, but not giving that moral or ideational leadership of sorts. Turkey is filling that space up. So I wouldn't say it will be entirely fair, but I do understand the larger point that you make that Turkey has somehow mellowed down its rhetoric. But I would say that even if, for example, Turkey doesn't want to play that role when it comes to prickling India, but there will be countries in our own region and in our periphery who will use Turkey because of the fact that Turkey has made a claim. And obviously, I don't think it will play a larger role it would be too consequential in terms of policy making. But for example, for leaders like Muizu, for that matter, uh, who are articulating their, you know, their interest and their foreign policy, their outlook to the world, and more importantly, their opposition to India in those terms, in religious cultural terms. I think for them, uh, this kind of leadership or these kind of issues can be, used in a certain manner, and I think Turkey will play a part there if it wants to. So right now, it has maintained a good relation on both sides of the spectrum when it comes to European issues as well. It has got concessions, mind you. I don't think it backed down. And at the same time, I think it is a bit hesitant on how to approach South Asia. But yeah, I can concede the fact that we haven't seen some very bombastic or very bombastic space statements on them from Kashmir. But that's also because we have managed to, in India, managed to ensure that the Kashmir issue is not internationalized to an extent that it was, let's say, 4 years ago. And again, as I said, that's also a function of where Pakistan is right now. So I don't think it would be wise for Turkey to, unnecessarily rake up the issue.
Yes, would you like to add something on Turkey, India, Turkey thing before we go on to other issues?
Sure. So I don't know if this. Okay, so let me put it this way. I think Turkey is going to be a really big menace for India for a while to come now. Um, I have followed Turkey for a while now. I just haven't happened to tweet about it as much. Um, but they've never really had a position that you could construe as being favorable to the direction India is going in, right? Especially when you look at their weapons development program, and especially after Erdogan's rise to power, it's only going to get much worse for us. On the question of Armenia, I don't think the last chapter has been written yet. I think there's a lot more to be written because the Azeris don't stop until all of Armenia is absorbed. That's just the nature of the Aliyev regime, and Turkey is more than happy to play along with it, and the Israelis will also play along with it because the long game Israel is playing here. I mean, the Israelis have been involved with the Azeris since the 90s, right? So since Azerbaijan actually came into being, and the entire motivation for them is to have bases that are closer to Iran to do everything from surveillance to kinetic operations. So, in this regard, they are as open to doing anything required to achieve that aim, including and up to genocide. That's what is not stated explicitly, but I mean, that's the subtext. In this regard, Iran is, let's put it this way, they have a lot of reservations, right? And increasingly, those reservations are starting to manifest themselves in a way that uh, that implies that should things become too uncomfortable for them, they will step in, right? So far, they've only made threatening moves, but I can tell you it's a near certain fact that if the Azeris try to do a conquest of Armenia, the Iranians won't sit there and take it because they know exactly what it means for their regime. And I think this is where India comes in. I've written about this specifically a long time ago, but we can continue to arm Armenia. We can also bolster our image in the arms market with such transactions. The only caveat being if we aim to arm Armenia, we have to go whole hog. Right? This can't be like a ikka dukka system which they are, oh, look at us, we've hit our production targets. No, because if we, for example, if we sell them Pinaka systems, right, but they do not have proper air defenses, they do not have a proper air defense network, all those air defense networks are breached thanks in part to Israel and Turkey. Uh, what will happen is you'll have Indian products, going on drone feeds circulating around the world as a advertisement for Turkish and Israeli products, right? So that is a one caveat there. That being said, Iran and India here sort of see eye to eye quite a bit. I mean, it's not stated openly, but uh, we don't want the Azeri, Pakistanis, and Turks to come closer to us because they started to make a lot of noise on Kashmir. And the Iranians obviously don't want the Azeris to become the preeminent power there and Armenia to be completely demolished. And Armenia, in that sense, becomes the last outpost of both Iran and India. But circling back to Turkey proper again, with Erdogan in particular, I have said this on this podcast before as well, but I won't trust the guy at all. Right? Even if he, like I think Rishabh also touched on this, even if he says nothing, that is not to say that they have toned down a lot of their stances. What they're doing is they're just playing smart. right? When you look at how they have played both Ukraine and Russia, it's sort of incredible in that sense because it's what we achieve, it's what we aspire to be, right?
Yeah.
They will send as much, they've sent a lot of military equipment to Ukraine. People don't touch on this, but if you have been tracking Ukraine for a while now, a lot of the armored vehicles the Ukrainian army is using comes from Turkey. At the same time, they have no objections, flying into Russia, shaking Putin's hand and saying, you know what, buddy, let's do something, yeah. And the Russians don't seem to mind it either, right? Despite all that has happened, they're still chutty buddy, right? So much so that the people don't know this, but the Turks released the leaders of the Azov battalion, right, who were sent to Turkey on the condition that they would be sent back to Ukraine only after the war was over. Turks were like, okay, you don't give us what we want, we're going to release them. So I would say we need to be very careful in dealing with Turkey. They are definitely going to be our biggest rivals after China and Pakistan. I say not the second biggest because there is a proximity factor with Pakistan and how it plays into our equations when you add it along with China. But they're definitely going to be a big threat for us going forward. At least that's what I think.
Yeah, a lot of India's problems in the neighborhood also will be often articulated by some of the groups and parties in it will be couched in essentially uh, pan religious identity and solidarity. So and I don't think Turkey is going to always support it in a way in which we some people in India would expect. But at the same time, I don't think Turkey would not be a player at all. um, Maldives is obviously people don't take it as seriously, but and I think for good reason because the scale and the nature of the spat is different. But we also have a big neighbor in Bangladesh where you have Islamic parties, and again, Islamic parties, not your normal Islamic mainstream parties, but other parties, especially the Jamaat and other affiliates, who've had good relations in terms of how they are being projected in Turkish media as well. All of that leads me to believe that yes, it might create some headaches, and maybe Turkey might be willing to sometime to play ball with some of these elements, even if there is no direct support per se. It will lend legitimacy to some of the concerns these people will share or the complaints that they will air about India. So it might become a problem there as well. But I think in general also Turkey is also becoming a major arms player per se in terms of the manufacturing capacity it has. It will also be it can definitely become an alternate to India in many of these countries, especially if, for example, you have parties like the BNP coming into the picture. So I think it won't be maybe again not maybe meaningful in terms of what they sell, etc., but in terms of the whole idea that some of these smaller countries may use these small steps to show, like just like a token piece of action as to them moving away from India, not being too dependent. For example, everybody talked about how the Maldives is dependent on countries like India for some of its essential services, when it comes to not just medical emergencies and whatnot, but in terms of geological surveys and mapping of the area, especially in the ocean and whatnot. You saw, for example, when Muzu went to Turkey, it also got some assistance or a promise for some assistance on those fronts. So again, I mean, I'm just saying that it is a viable option for people who are trying to articulate their interest in opposition to India, and there are, I'm sure, going to be countries who are going to use that, and I'm sure Turkey would like to have that leverage, or that option open for it to exercise when it wants to.
So now let's come to Qatar. And what do you think it is happening between India and Qatar use? I can't figure it out because for the simple fact that they, I don't know the reason behind why we couldn't do what we did with Saudis or UAE with Qatar. Why aren't our relations that good with Qatar? I mean, we have seen
I
recently they were about to hang eight of our citizens. Somehow we managed to stall that, and we don't know what's the price we paid. Perhaps the new gas deal was one of the prices. I don't know, but like they pushed it
uh,
really hard, right?
Okay, so maybe what I'll do is let's separate the second part event, which is what they threatened or are threatening to do to our ex-servicemen. Let's keep that to one side. And let's maybe focus on the first point you brought up, which is the broader point of why haven't we achieved with Qatar what we have achieved with the UAE and the KSA. And I think a lot of this goes back to the UAE and the KSA wanting to do this. Right? I think on the Indian side, there is a problem among certain quarters, again, not all of them, certain quarters, to think that the impetus for the development of the relationship with the two countries in West Asia came from the Indian side. While it is certainly true we made overtures, in such a situation, we are dramatically underplaying the importance of overtures coming from their end, right? Both the KSA and the UAE, for their own reasons, are also trying to hit to influence. In fact, if you look at asymmetric kinetic operations, which once again is just code for proxy warfare, that both the UAE and the KSA have been engaging over the past 10 years, it's been relatively speaking, more intensive than what was. Right. So we all know that the Saudis were sort of involved in the entire Mujahideen complex. But what they're currently involved in today is a much more intensive form of that, including an up to kinetic operation, right, performed directly by the state. And in such a situation, with the KSA's own trouble with the US, for example, their own overtures to both Iran and China, and their own diplomatic games, India happens to be one of the countries, which this again goes back to Rishabh's point, of benefiting from the hedging that different countries are doing, right? So they maybe don't want to be as dependent on certain power blocks and see doing deals with India as well as taking advantage of India's economic rise as beneficial to them. So while this has been happening, it could, I'm not saying it's as simple as, but a major factor could be that Qatar hasn't really pursued the same policy. It doesn't really see India in the same way or hasn't made calculations, the same calculations that has propelled both the UAE and the KSA. Admittedly, they are sort of joined at the hip to some degree. It hasn't made the same level of calculation. That could be one major factor, and I believe it is a major factor. Secondly, on the point of the Indian soldiers, the ex-Indian soldiers, I have been in sort of two minds about this, right? On the one side, I do agree with you. I do sort of feel like maybe the giant gas deal was a form of concession, right? Or maybe something else was expected from us in order to free them. But on the other hand, there is a part of me that also thinks, what if this is as it seems, right? Like they were indeed caught snooping in places they should not have been snooping, right? And now India using some of its goodwill it has in Qatar is trying to get them free. And signs are they will most likely be free, but it will be a more painful process. So we never know. So I'm sort of on two minds about that question. And with as more of the story is revealed, I guess more and more will come to light because from the people I've talked to so far, most of them seem to be of the opinion that uh, the Qataris made this out to be more than what it was in order to expect certain concessions. So that's what a lot of the people I'm talking to believe. That being said, I'm willing to be swayed both ways. I don't really have like a solid opinion on that particular issue.
But Rishabh, do you see an opening for a India-Qatari friendship? Like, I mean, I'm not saying we are enemies yet now, but
Yeah, yeah.
is it
Mm.
going to be a similar path that we saw with Abu Dhabi or Riyadh?
I think it's probably should probably see them as similar entities also. Yes, Qatar is a very important partner for the United States as well. So a lot of people see them as having a lot of leverage or sway in the region, not because of their economic power, even though they're a very small country, and obviously the strength that it derives from its natural resources and whatnot, but also from the fact that it has good relations or it has maintained good relations, despite all the friction it has had with Gulf countries in recent years with the United States. So I don't think it looks at India in that way. It probably doesn't look at India, being as an effective player or having any sort of leverage per se, which I don't think is entirely wrong from their perspective. And again, you have to remember that a large part of these Gulf countries essentially had a blockade had imposed a blockade on this country. So there were a lot of friction between these players in the region. I mean, even though that has gone away, there seems to be still, you know, a lot of bad blood between these two sides. And I won't say that that relations are too bad, but relations have never essentially gone. We've had basic relations per se, nothing out of the blue. In the context of the sailors, however, the retired uh, sailors from the Indian Navy being, charged with, very serious charges of espionage and whatnot. I have a very controversial opinion on this. I do think there was a case here, and multiple reports have suggested about some certain links. It could very well possibly be that not all the people involved in this whole episode were essentially involved at the same level, because this is not essentially the first time that retired Indian personnel were being used in Qatari projects like that. But do remember here as well that maybe it is being seen as more serious is because of the alleged role of another security agency, which is seen as a probably a more inimical force than, let's say, the Indians. So a lot of times people forget that the charges of espionage against them is not that they're spying for the Indian intelligence services, but for essentially Israel's intelligence agencies. So again, it could be a factor that maybe they were playing hardball on this already, not because they wanted to extract gas deal. I'm pretty sure Qatar is not making such big moves based on LNG deal. As much as it sounds, good and enticing for us to explain things like that, I think they don't really want or have that much of. I mean, obviously, they would like India to, get into more
But the
long-term
question is,
contracts and whatnot.
Rishabh, what did they get in exchange for commuting death sentences? Right, it's a pretty big deal. That's what, like
No,
everyone is.
my point is they don't. I mean, it's not. It's easy and very enticing for us to always feel that there is a quid pro quo of sorts, and I'm pretty sure concessions can happen in many other ways, and we would probably not know the same. And by the way, the deal that we're talking about is not a new deal. It's not a very huge deal that has come out of the blue, etc. It's essentially a renewal of an existing deal. So I don't know if I'll read too much on it, but you're right that there must be something. If there is, was a serious issue, which I believe it was. There must be some concession. And again, just a reminder that they have only commuted, their death penalty sentences. Most of them are still going to, the sentences against them when it comes to the long term life sentences. I don't think that there will be too much change there. Hopefully, I'm wrong, because I do believe that there has been some changes. Because I think the Indian government took it up very seriously. Maybe perhaps reached out to Qatar, maybe also to the United States of America, and there was some help, sought after there. So we actually don't know, but at the same time, I think that maybe
Can
there
I
are
come
some
in,
people.
please? So I actually thanks Aditya and Rishabh for that. I think there was a quid pro quo, and the quid pro quo was in the language that India used for the Hamas-Israel war. You can note the dates, and you can match
Yeah,
that up
excuse
really
me,
well.
one second, please.
Sorry.
Let me finish the point first, and you can add in.
Yes, yes, Rishabh, finish.
So my insertion point is that, again, I think he would probably bring up uh, some of the strict language, or probably the what has been characterized as India's changed or evolved position. I honestly don't think that that has anything to do with that. But at the same time, I think there might be, something involved on the highest level of government. Sometimes I think people also disregard some of, if for example there is a exchange of or some communication between the highest leadership between the two countries, that can have an impact as well, because countries then obviously take a call according to what they think is the what is in their interest, in terms of maintaining relations and ties, etc. So I think could be multiple factors, but yeah, I'm open to hearing to what other people think, their lot theories, logic, whatever. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Thanks.
Brian, you wanted
Can I go?
something to add, please?
Yep, yep. So thank you, first of all, for organizing this space. And I basically believe of all this conversation, Qatar is the one main country in West Asia which people underestimate due to its size. It's the canary in the coal mine, which people always miss. Rishabh has given a great elucidation, but he's missed a couple of critical points. Let me just go back. Just in the last month, there has been one investigation by Fox News to indicate that Qatar was one country which was spying on sitting US senators. Qatar was one country which was had illegal, I think, FARA agents on both sides of the aisle, from Democrats, from Lindsey Graham to the guy from New Jersey, the New Jersey senator who has been charged for illegally both Egypt and Qatar. So Qatar is the critical country which people miss because of its small size. It has infinite influence, and infinite influence it means that US is not controlled by 350 million people. US is controlled by the think tanks. And if you go and I think Rishabh can do it. I think you can do it. Go and search for every single one. Let's start with like Brookings. Let's start with Stimson. Let's
I
start
think
with any.
just 1 second, just one
Yeah,
second, please. I think we're already aware of these issues. I think what you have to
yeah.
focus, and I think what you should focus on, is how exactly is that influence used directly in this case, and how is that in relation to
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. And
apparent concessions
Brian,
being from India's point.
our session is pretty much, I mean, I get what you are saying is all important, but I would like to keep it focused on how it impacts India's and how it has went on with the Modi 2.0 in line with the
Yes.
subject issue, basically.
And this is where you have to make the point. So when Rishabh was saying there's like quid pro quo, if you look at the language that India used, and you can you can get the date lines correctly right out, and you can see which think tanks pushed out what kind of stuff, and you can clearly see a line that think tanks which are more affiliated towards Qatar and which are on Qatari funded projects and have Qatari affiliated teams, whether in Doha or somewhere, you can see that. And to very briefly, this is not a two-man game. Qatar uses India as a ploy, or whatever you want to say, as a soft language where they can beat around Israel. And there is not a two-man gameship here. You can look at how Qatari conversations happen, and those Qatari conversations keep piling on what kind of conversation they want to drive about internal Indian politics and projection of India as a Hindu majority and an extremist state. You can see all of those, and I don't need to go into detail about what Washington Post write and which Washington Post writers are already on their money and where they go to Doha debates and sponsor their events. So I'm not even going that. So there's the projection of the Modi government because they see them as amicable and more closer to Israel when they want. And Qatar's main role, if you read
Right,
their own documents,
we get that. We totally get all of that. The the influence it has in Washington, in think tanks, politicians, lobbying efforts. We totally understand that.
it's more than influence.
I'm
Influence India
just,
would have influence.
just can you just focus on the fact? I mean, the fact that you said that, how, for example, like,
So
you believe there
I'm
has been
saying there
some
is
quid
not a two-party
pro
system.
quo,
It's a
right?
three-party system where there is a
Fair, fair, whatever.
yeah.
I'm saying, can you just focus on the fact how, for example, you think, right? How, for example, Qatar, or what do you think happened between Qatar and Indians there, and what do you think were some of the quid pro quo? Do you think it was only
So I think there are two things
right?
is right. Yes. So I think Rishabh is right that there was some sort of a system where Indian soldiers were working for Israeli agents, directly, indirectly, knowingly, unknowingly. That is true. I think Rishabh is right in that. I think second point is also true that Qatar did not want any kind of gas deal. They don't really care that much about the pennies on the stock. In fact, the new deal is probably supposed to be cheaper than the previous one. So they're not caring about the amount of LNG that they're selling. They can sell it to multiple people. There are multiple buyers in from Japan to everywhere. So they have too much money on that. What they basically wanted is the change in the tone that India had since in the votes. And there was, if you note, there was, I think, Sitaraman or something which posted that they have changed their vote. And this is what they clearly want. They're not really looking after money as such. And their main goal from the birth, if you look at the main, because Qatar is not just one family country. Look at that family. I think it's what's the name of the company? And they listed, and that's why I'm going back to the Brookings luncheon. So there's a 2013 Brookings luncheon private, which was released later on, the documents. There you can read the thoughts of the monarchy there, the couple of rulers, and they clearly state that right now there's a lot of support for Israel in US, but we want to hollow that out. They give out a very detailed plan. It's a PDF. You can people can search for it on Brookings 2013 luncheon with the Qatari Emir, and you can read through that. So it has nothing to do with the LNG terminal, and it is also true that India gets anywhere close to Israel, and which India needs to, because India needs the top let's say, military arsenal, and which I don't think US is going to go with providing everything. So India needs a reliable partner where it needs to build up its military heft, and for that there are only two countries of that nature. There's one, France, and there's Israel. Whenever India gets closer to Israel, you will find that Qatar's role, whether to project India as a more of a authoritarian extremist state, or whether it's on the other side to project everybody is dying and everybody is going to get killed because of India's role in subjugating its minority population, you will get those
Hmm.
rise again and again. And similarly, wherever you see a little more toned down and conversation on Israel, you'll see a more
Brian,
manageable Qatar. So Qatar's
can
role is
you
not a manageable
can you
Qatar's role.
specify
Yeah,
then,
thank you.
because you point out
Yeah.
that maybe because there
Yes.
was, there was an attempt from Qatari side to have put more pressure on India to take a different stance on the
Yes.
Israel-Gaza conflict. Can you tell me, or
Yes.
like just point out, because you're pushing this point, I want you to elaborate on this further as to what is a concrete way in which you think it happened. Do you think it happened because of some,
It's
evolved position on
it's in
the
the vote.
India's
Just a
from India's
second.
side in terms of voting
Just
or
a
whatever?
second. Just a second. I want to intervene here. Brian, if you would like to answer, can you answer it in brief? Because I would like to go to other
Hmm.
issues. Because it's getting
Mhm.
too long. Like I have two, three other issues to discuss. That's why. Yeah. If you want to answer that, can you please do it in like brief, not very.
Yeah, if you look at the amount of votes that
Hmm.
India casted in all the motions put forward in the UN General
Hmm.
Assembly, you can look at the one more final
Hmm.
motion which India put forward for the cessation of
Hmm.
violence, and which had a little more conversation
Hmm.
line. India projected as such as that it was just a matter of whether they were more towards the cessation of violence,
Hmm.
and everyone, every what you call hostage should be reverted back to their place. But
And
it
you
wasn't
think
anything
this
about
was,
that. It was just the time at which,
hmm. And you think that was because on
yeah.
the
So
behest of
that's
Qatari pressure of sorts?
absolutely exactly.
Hmm.
You can check the deadline.
Hmm.
The deadline
Brian,
doesn't lie.
Brian,
Just the
Brian,
timeline doesn't lie.
can you
Thank you.
clarify? You said some three-party system, right? Who has three-party system? Hello? Can you hear me, Brian? Okay, I think he's not responding. So let's move on. We have last two, three issues. Before going to the China and US questions in the region and India's, how India would like to engage with those questions in the region. Abhi, I would like you to maybe briefly summarize the India's perhaps the most positive aspect in the region, that is relations with Saudi Arabia and UAE. And these relations with these two nations are as good as it can get for India, right? And we have pretty good economic deals with them. UAE is almost like an de facto. I mean, I won't call it ally, but like as close to an ally that India can get, perhaps within its limitations. Uh, so last 5 years has
Right.
kind of consolidated the relations with these two countries pretty much, and Saudi Prince sees India as a legitimate partner in his vision to diversify Saudi economy, right? Because he is taking pretty bold steps for Saudi. So in that way, like we have kind of doubled down on our relations with these two countries. Can you summarize few issues points?
Sure. So I think the best part with Saudi relations is, of course, and I think I have also featured the query on IMEC, which is obviously important because Saudi, Israel, and Dubai will be a much,
Yeah,
much,
yeah, yeah. We will come to IMF.
but
We
I'll be
will come to
specific,
IMF
but
in the end. Yeah, yeah, that's
I know, but
yeah.
yeah, yeah. Like, अरे बाबा बोलने तो दो. Okay, so to be very specific, I was just referring to the question. I'm not going to answer that question. So, um, in a simpler way to say, I think on development cooperation, we are already seeing investments between MNCs, big companies in India from Reliance to Adani and others. That's already happening. Whether it is agriculture or infrastructure or anything, digital aspects are also there on which investments are happening. Aspects of investments in banking sector, like Paytm and others, that's happening. Uh, a vision fund was already formed so that investors from Bangalore and otherwise can engage, and even investors from Riyadh can engage. That's already happening. Sector-wise collaborations have been much much important when it comes to crude oil and all. So that's obviously there. Energy, definitely, especially solar and others, because Saudi Arabia is also now a member of ISA. Apart from that, yeah, automotive, textile, food and security, all of that stuff we already know. Strategically, diversification of ties is important. Maybe Saudis can also benefit I2U2, the economic forum between India, UAE, Israel, and the United States indirectly. So yeah, that's my summary when it comes to the economic aspects of diplomacy and how it has happened so far. So, yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, so now let's come to the United States India question, right?
just to add a couple of things. Sorry, Aditya. Just in terms of the security cooperation, also, recently, I'm sure you and most of your probably listeners already know this, but just to emphasize it again, we saw, for example, the maiden exercise, joint exercise between the two countries and its
important important thing to highlight that we've had this port in Chabahar that's been floundering for the last decade or so, and that since U.S. sanctions, that India has drastically cut down, almost eliminated its consumption of Iranian oil, and that after this key economic linkage that had been linking India and Iran together had been weakened, I think it was an explicit effort by the Saudi government to make sure that a recovery must be curtailed. I think that is an important part of this India-Saudi relationship that shouldn't be ignored.
I think we touched upon this in the beginning when we talked about
Yes.
Iran's India-Iran relationship, probably some of the pitfalls that emerge. But I honestly don't like just a small area of disagreement. I don't think that it's like India has been able to detach or put the relationship in silos. Obviously, that's a difficult task considering the tension between the two sides. But I think it will probably not be as challenging right now. But at the same time, I would say that yes, although it's a potential challenge, uh, Indian relationship with Iran is not, I would say, limited to the amount of oil that it would purchase or not purchase. I think India and Iran look at each other, in terms of where they stand regionally, etc. Obviously, Iran would like us to purchase Iranian oil, and there are some grievances there, no denying that. But I would say that India-Iran relationship uh, is probably, I mean, they're not as bad as people think they are. Not as much, at least when it comes to it having an impact on Saudis looking in India in a different manner. I think Saudis themselves have been a bit mature on this front, realizing the necessities that India has when it comes to Iran. But you're right in the sense that at least when it comes to that aspect, you cannot leave what's happening with Iran out, especially if there is a further polarization in the region.
The,
Yeah.
the only
I mean,
thing,
I definitely think that this relationship has been like, I definitely think the India-Iran relationship is more holistic than just economic and oil and resources. I think that what was really here is that Saudi saw an opportunity and it took it. And this was I think that
Yeah.
India's outreach, of course, Modi diplomacy to West Asia has been extensive and has been proactive. But I think that this has been almost a specific concerted effort by Saudi, and this is
Yeah,
I think
probably
where
to
uh,
maybe tip the balance here and there. But I would say that overall, I think their main idea is, or the main drive in that relationship to better those relationship has, I mean, has all, I mean, this, my point, broader point is that the overall effort has started or predated the kind of impact it has had, or the kind of, the if you want to call it the downward spiral in the relationship. But because I think they, in the early days, I think in the Modi, like the second, in the early days of the second administration, or the second government, so to speak, I think we've already had a push from the Saudis. They realize that this is something that they have to do, especially under MBS. So I think it's a broader effort, but you're right. Maybe they realize that there is a window of opportunity here where we could probably get more things done. But I do believe that
yeah.
they understand that it's a bit, it's not as linked as some people would like us to like it to be.
I mean, I also think that there's two other factors and that really kind of push the Saudi-India relationship, and that's first it's the UAE, and that existing UAE-India ties had been improving at a fast pace, and that this interregional rivalry between the UAE and Saudi of who could develop ties to India faster, because they I think they realized that if the UAE was to capitalize on this, and Saudi was not doing it. It would not be involved as much in the actual connection and the linkages that the UAE was really developing, and
Yeah.
that is one thing. But the other thing that I think has also been something that the Saudis have especially noticed, and I think this also goes into the calculation of the UAE, is that they've that the emergence of India as a significant third party, as a significant enough pole in the region, and that amongst larger U.S. China competition, that as you have Chinese consumption of Saudi oil, of UAE,
Satvik,
as this includes that
Satvik,
also that
Satvik, just a
hmm?
sec. I would like to pause you there because my next questions are going to be related to that. That is, US China factors in the region. So I will just would like to request you to pause there, and we will deal those issues in the next few minutes. Is it fine? Is that fine with you?
That's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay.
So let's come to the last couple of factors in the region, that is US and China. Let's discuss the US first. So US, I will start with you. Now, United States in the last few years, starting with the Abrahamic Accords, then later Indo-Abrahamic, under Indo-Abrahamic framework, couple of trilaterals. So United States has been investing on India's presence in the region, and it has factored in basically dilute its share its burden sharing with other countries like India in the region, if not in terms of security, at least in terms of economic partnership, and kind of slowly, mm, if not completely take away, dilute its presence in the region. That was the United States calculation. But everything has gone for the toss, right? At the moment, it is pretty much as engaged in the region as it ever was in the last few decades. Everyone was thinking like, okay, United States will be focusing. I mean, it will double down on the idea of Asia pivot or the Indo-Pacific. Indo-Pacific has been quite muted in the last 6 to 12 months, and there is no Quad meeting in this year, and I think there is no reappointment of Indo-Pacific ambassador from the United States after the term has ended. So this whole year till the next till the next US president swear in the 2025, the whole Indo-Pacific will be muted. So what's happening? Like, would India like this arrangement at the moment? I don't think India would like this arrangement, right? Like West Asian situation, United States and West Asia has complicated at least India's priorities, if I'm not wrong. Use? Yes, Satvik, I will come to you. Use?
Okay, so again, I'm going to do like what politicians do and like not answer your question specifically, but answer everything else. Um, I think what we are seeing insofar as the sudden pivot away of the United States from the Indo-Pacific, I think the jury's still out on that. Like I know a lot of people think that they've pivoted away completely, but I think we need to give them a little more time because assuming the situation dies down over the
No,
next.
my point is, you sorry for cutting off you. My point is not that US is completely abandoning Indo-Pacific. I don't think it will, because China is too big a player there. My point is about, it is somehow there are returns in between, right? Nothing is letting United States completely smoothen its transition into Indo-Pacific. Like earlier it was
Oh,
Ukraine.
that I don't think. I think what's so that's the point I was coming to. I think what's happening in the Middle East, right, is it's being drawn in by a certain domestic compulsion. So when the October 7th attacks happened, right, and that entire peace process was disturbed, the reason the US was sucked back into this region, if you look at the series of escalatory steps, the US backs Israel to the head. And this has a lot to do with the amount of influence Israel is able to wield within the US political system. And I'm not going to go into it because then, that opens up a whole other door. The more the US gets drawn into this, right, the more you have anti-US and anti-Israel players starting to also do brinksmanship, right? Go back to Hezbollah threatening to invade and stuff like that. In fact, they're always threatening to invade. After that, you have the Yemenis starting to enter the picture and do what they're doing currently, trying to strangle shipping. So once that happens, the United States is once again dragged into the region. Then add on to top of this, you've got Iranian proxies like Kataib Hezbollah starting to bomb and kill Americans. And then you have America having to respond to this, which builds even more escalation, which draws them in even further, right? Now, all of this, yes, I agree, it sort of sucked the United States attention away from the Indo-Pacific as much as it needs to, relative to as much as it needs to be, and towards West Asia, and more specifically the Middle East, as they like to call it. But what I'm trying to say is the jury's still out on that. Assuming the situation here cools off a little, I do think there is a healthy chance that the United States does go, okay, let's start going back to the Indo-Pacific, because that's where we need to because that's where sorry, excuse me, because that's where the new threat is going to emerge, right? Because if you look at the US domestic political system, China has not disappeared. Like, this is a big mistake a lot of people are making. China has not disappeared from the American political scene. It's in fact only gotten stronger. In fact, now the Democrats and the Republicans are trying to play a game of who is the bigger China hawk, right? Whose policies, like the Democrats, the allegations they have been leveling against the Republicans of late is that Trump only postured being anti-China. Look at us, we are actually anti-China, right? And then the Republicans come back and say, no, you're not actually anti-China. You're actually trying to moderate the actual anti-China stance. We are the actual anti-China, right? So that's sort of what's going on there. So that's why I'm saying the jury is still it's still out on whether the Americans have, as you said, not abandoned, but pivoted away so much that they can't pivot back again completely. And I do agree there is some merit in that argument, because say the Chinese do pull the trigger on the Taiwanese invasion, what then, right? And I completely take that point, but I'm just saying, right, the United States can come back to this region. Secondly, as far as India is concerned, look, I'll be completely blunt about it. So long as our core interests, right, which is mostly trade and our citizens being safe, are concerned, as long as these two conditions are met, we're like, you know what, Americans can go do 100 things that everyone hates, right? Or they could not exist. We are cool. So long as the boat isn't rocked for us, we're chill with everything. And I think that this is something even a lot of Indians are sort of uncomfortable with, because it's a very transactional, very open stating of what India's position is. But long and short of it, it's that's what it boils down to, right? Don't stop money coming into India. Don't stop energy coming into India. Keep Indian citizens safe. That's sort of what I would boil the Indian position down.
Yes, Satvik,
I mean,
you
I think
wanted
that
to.
regarding the whole U.S. position on the Indo-Pacific versus the Middle East, is that if you see who is actually in charge, who really seems to be taking the energy of each portfolio in the United States, if you're looking at the Middle East, it's Blinken. You have the Blinken, and you have the various facilities of the DoD and parts of the State Department, but the Indo-Pacific still remains a core focus. You got the NSA and Jake Sullivan, and you got Kurt Campbell being appointed to Deputy Secretary of State. That means that the Indo-Pacific actually, even though there isn't a coordinator like Kurt Campbell was previously, he actually has even more power now. Of course, he has a larger portfolio to deal with, but he is an Asia hand. He is a complete through and through Asia hand. I was actually at the Ambassador Sandhu's farewell event next to the White House, and the this was a personal Kurt Campbell made a personal visit to see off Kurt Campbell to see Ambassador Sandhu, and has brought messages from the White House itself. This is going to remain the core focus of overarching in U.S. policy and foreign policy for the remaining future. And when it comes to the actual when it comes to the actual quad meeting that seems to have evaporated, is that first of all, there I was talking to many people in the U.S. space here, is that first of all there's a litany of concerns. Is a there's the concern about just elections, that this is be too close to Biden's elections, and there's no actual meeting now, because if you have it after May, it's after the Indian election, but it's the peak season for Americans, and that the Ambassador Garcetti himself, he said it was going to happen probably right after November, assuming a Biden administration comes back into power. And when it comes to the visit that was supposed to happen during Republic Day, part of it was, of course, you hear the whole headlines about Pannun and the Khalistanis. That was one factor, yes, but other factors was there is the Biden administration, the Democrats, even though they want to embrace India, they still need to they cannot do it openly and completely ignoring all the what they say as the human rights concerns. This is actually something that really pissed off the Macron team that was visiting India recently, is that the Macron team had faced internal opposition within the visiting delegation, that they were concerned that they were having being basically carrying water for the re-election of Prime Minister Modi, and they felt like it was too involved, and that the Biden team, that people from there that I spoken to, said that they were happy that they didn't at least explicitly seem to get involved in Indian domestic politics. There was concern about domestic politics and the whole election
But
thing right there.
how would the whole thing on Republic Day be anything be seen as an election parade of sorts? I don't understand. I think that would
Like,
probably
I mean,
be a
this
more American thing
Yeah,
to
yeah, because
see,
it's an
because
annual.
it's close to the election. I don't think anybody made
Yeah,
up their mind about who to vote based on who the chief guest was on
yeah,
Republic
yeah.
Day. I
they're
think
not
you can
uh,
see that
they're not
in the Indian.
convinced it's actually a voting thing. This is mainly a concern that they had done. It was
I
it
think
was
I
it,
think I don't
it
think
was
there's any basis if you say that in India, you'll be laughed at.
Yeah,
But
but
I mean, yes, it's not in
one second.
India, but this is
I'm going to do something
uh,
controversial. Right, hold on, guys. History being made on the podcast. Hold on, I'm going to do something controversial, and I'm going to defend the Biden administration. Right. So I think personally, I think
is
while
that
all of us in
that's not
India,
that's not unprecedented, by the way. Just saying.
Rishabh, come on, okay, don't take my moment away from me. But what I'm trying to say is, look, I understand that in India we sort of laugh at that and we look at that as ridiculous. But guys, Kamala Harris, right? She's a vice president of the United States. So maybe, just maybe, in their minds, they genuinely think that they can influence elections here. So maybe this give them the benefit of the doubt that they think
I
they
think
could
what
influence our
Satvik.
elections.
I think to take Satvik's
it's
point
not.
more seriously.
I'm not saying that they're going to influence Indian elections.
No, I
That is
understand
not
that.
what they.
I understand that. But I think I understand what Satvik is saying. Let me just. I
By
think
the way,
what he's saying
I
is
was
that
just
there
being
is a,
farcical. I wasn't being serious, guys. Please,
yeah,
I
domestic.
just need to
I
put
think
that out.
I think what he's saying is that there's a domestic constituency. in obviously the Democrats have a constituency where obviously these issues matter, and you need to obviously play to the gallery, you know, at the same time express and do the needful, expressing concerns and whatnot. So it may seem like to avoid the optics per se, you don't essentially give into the idea that you are supporting the administration here in any way. But my only concern is that if it was related, I think it would probably make more sense if it was related to the Panwan issue. I don't think it is related in terms of the optics, or for example, just because if let's say Biden did come to the Republic Day celebration and parade, whatever optics were there or would could have been seen or misconstrued as the Biden administration supporting Modi and that being giving boost to him and during his election. I think Modi and Biden themselves have had enough, uh, images or visual imagery of being too close and whatnot. Personal in terms of their personal rapport and the friendship they share. So I don't know why the
Yeah.
concern from the.
So
My only concern. I get your point, but I think
yeah,
that's a bit absurd to argue because look at the fact that.
I mean, so
Huh,
I would say some of this is more justified in hindsight by these people that I've spoken to. So one of the people that I like spoken to was they're visiting the whole. There was a whole event in Delhi, hosted by the Adanta Center. I think a couple of weeks ago, um,
uh,
and one of the French delegation was there, and one of the things that they complained about was that during Macron's visit, he was handed a statue of Ram Mandir, and
mm,
that caused some it was an unprompted, it was an unscheduled handing of a model,
mm.
and this caused a lot of friction within the French delegation,
See,
and they didn't
I
want like
honestly, I totally get that point, but I don't think
yeah
in any ways that is influencing any policy. Max to max, what would have happened? So Macron would have said a couple of lines like probably the Americans do, but I don't think it would have changed, the broader trajectory of the visit.
And it didn't even attract any press coverage, to be honest.
Yeah,
Not even.
let's be honest, in India also it's not a big deal. So you're right that maybe they're looking at from their
yeah
perspective or what they have to
yeah
tell their
But
voters back home.
Even in French coverage, I have not seen even one article or one French reporter
No,
or
I've
Indian
seen
reporter.
there have been couple of basically the mainstream ones. There have been couple of debates and whatnot about it, like prime time
Yeah, but
TV, but very
very
basic
quickly,
ones, like nothing.
I mean
yeah,
I think that the main thing that I'm trying to argue here is that the Americans, regardless of whether it seemed to be justified from the Indian perspective, that it was an optics issue, and they just didn't
But
want to
my
deal
point
with
is,
the.
look at the Quad Summit or the
Mhm.
American or the visit of Indian Prime Minister to the US, the state visit and whatnot. And remember, this has happened all after the whole Pannu thing essentially has unfolded, and it wasn't made public, but we know from the timeline now that while Modi was visiting the United States, while he was addressing the Congress, right, the Pannun issue was already being dealt with privately between the two countries, and yet you saw the two
Yeah,
leaders, right, embracing each other and everything else. So my point is, like, why make such a big deal out of this Republic Day, right? That's my point. Because if you think that, oh, by embracing him, by giving into these optics, we are somehow boosting his image, then why are you doing it in through? I mean, you have been doing it for the last 2 3 years already. So maybe you want to mellow things down or whatever. I get that, but I don't
yeah.
see the whole. Why would that be a reason to misgive? Being that chief day, the chief guest on the Republic Day. I don't see the connect there. And you're right. Maybe that's
I
how
think
they're justifying it themselves.
I mean the actual invitation to Republic Day was given was actually I think mistakenly announced by Ambassador
Yeah,
Garcetti
probably.
like a few months ago, and that was I think the gaffe
Yeah, I think,
that
and
I
that's what
think
I'm
that
saying.
the White House
Maybe some
wasn't
of these
preparing for.
excuses are also used by them, in their own system.
Yeah,
It becomes an easy excuse because I mean,
yeah,
what Biden would be seen being friendly to Modi. I mean, let's
yeah,
be honest. There are many times
Just
that
a
yeah.
has
second.
happened in the past.
I do think that we are, however, kind of getting distracted
Yeah,
from the topic of West
yeah.
Asia, though. So I think we should circle back to
We will
this.
have a separate part of the session on the United States-India relations under Modi 2.0. We can discuss most of these issues there, but I get the larger point. And only thing I would like to say is I'm inclined towards more Rishabh's side that it has got more to do with Pannun than any other thing. But yeah, Coming back to the last topic, that is China, and perhaps we may also include IMEC as part of the conversation. Now, uh, what did 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 India do enough in Modi 2.0 to diversify or to build its influence in the region? I know China is too big, so we won't be perhaps the equals to China in the region because their trade, their its economic size and influence is too big. But perhaps did we build enough engagements in the regions to have our own influence in the last 5 years? And I would like to bring in IMEC in the sense that IMEC was seen as kind of a big alternative to BRI, right? And BRI has been quite dormant for last 2 3 years, especially since the pandemic began. Part of the reason is China's economy is at the moment is in trouble, and of course there were large before pandemic there were grand plans of assisting Iran with $250 billion of infra projects for the next 20 25 years, something like that. There were some crazy plans, and at the moment none of that seems to have taken off. Maybe it will in future, but at the moment no. And as an alternative, IMEC was also seen as a good initiative to have a corridor from India to Europe via, of course, Jordan, uh, maybe not directly Israel, but nearby Israel, Saudi, etc. So it was a grand plan, and within few months, everything seems to have been like gone for a toss. Now you see in the neighboring region, even like pirates, like rogue actors supported by Houthis, randomly bombing ships, cargo ships, etc. Indian Navy rescuing them, United States sending its own troops to defend some of these trade routes. Everything has gone messy. Like, what's happening when it comes to like that grand vision of building alternative to China in the region? Anyone would like to start? You, Rishabh, Satwik, Abhivardhan? And do you see the future for like building alternatives trade routes? Like, do you see anything happening anytime soon?
I mean, so I think that one thing that people often get wrong when it comes to trade routes is that when they have this idea of a Chinese trade route, like a Chinese BRI or IMEC, is that they I think they see it often too much from a national terms. This is not China's say this is not China's own trade route. Trade from basically any country can go through these routes. That kind of that is pretty much how these go. So I think that although these are alternatives, this would be the Chinese alternative, the U.S. alternative, that they act as nodes that are weakening or strengthening according to the geopolitics of the time. Prior to this, blocking of this blocking of ships going into the Suez by the Houthis, IMEC personally, it kind of seemed to me kind of like a like very confusing idea to ship things to UAE, offload them, drive them, then offload. That seemed very confusing to me. But after this blocking of Suez, the value of such a trade route starts to become apparent. But when this things goes away, the value of this will start to become less apparent. And I think that this is what really is going to be the strategy when it comes to the future, is that you start to create alternatives that may not be what is like a full alternative, but it has to be something that can come in the case of rather other geopolitical developments.
And do you think was IMEC the tipping point for October 7 attacks? Like, did that trigger everything? And of course, looking at the scale of the operation, it seems like it was planned way ahead. But many seems to argue that IMEC was kind of the like final nail in the coffin to trigger the attack. Do you buy
Uh,
that argument?
no, I don't buy that argument in light of some of the other things that have bubbled up in the media space. Because I think the grander normalization between the Arab countries and Israel played much more of a role. And when I say grander normalization, I'm not talking very specifically of the Abraham Accords. I'm just talking of the general mood within the Middle East of, okay, even if you don't have a formal process of having peace with Israel, de facto peace with Israel such that you are effectively working with them even if you aren't in a name, right? So it's a de facto versus de jure, that symbolically versus in reality. And I think uh, I forget who said this specifically, but a combination of this general mood within the Middle East, as well as the belief that they needed to quote unquote get that message out, led to what happened on October 7th. Now, by the way, let me make it very clear, I'm not condoning what happened on October 7th. When I say getting the message out, I mean from their perspective, get the message out. Not saying that was the right way to get the message out. I need to put this out because people later come back at me saying, oh, so you're now simping for Hamas. So that's that. And secondly, I think as far as IMEC is concerned, I don't think we should give up too quickly. As I like to say, India is a country filled with a lot of B pillars, right? And I will not say what B means. All of you know what the B means here. But the moment, like, there's even one piece of news that states, something is not going India's way, half the comment page is like, oh my God, such a huge tragedy. Saudi Arabia में हो गया इंडिया का प्रोजेक्ट का सत्यानाश आज तक पर that sort of nonsense. So I think we just again
That
once
was
again
a
everyone
great
needs to.
mimicry. That was a great mimicry.
Yeah, I know. I
I
mean,
loved it. Enjoyed. Do it again.
no, like let's keep it serious, right? Because first of all, I'm battling like numerous allegations. One day I'm a Hindutva fascist bigot, the other day I'm a Nehruvian secular youth crop. One day I'm a liberal, the other day I'm a trad. So maybe some other time. Um,
You sound like Radhi sir this time.
no. Understand my point. Understand my point here, right? I have not said that. Matlab, I may have said it, but I'm not exactly said it. So
No,
please.
I obviously.
No. I'm just being
Yeah,
an ass. But um, to be serious, but the IMEC thing, I think everyone needs to sort of chill a little bit because I don't think it's done and dusted as a lot of people think. Once the Israel situation cools down a little bit, I very strongly believe it will come back onto the table. In fact, there is a very good chance that it may come back onto the table even before that, right? We don't know because when you look at the broader project, um, in a way, it is right up the alley of both the UAE and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And given the trajectories both countries are headed on, I personally think structural forces will eventually push it through.
So, Rishabh, I will give you the final word on the Modi 2.0 China question in West Asia. How did you think Modi handled China in West Asia, and what are the challenges going forward?
I mean, before I begin, I'll just give my 2 cents on IMEC. I think just like again, benefit of doubt. Uh, we don't know enough about the actual specifics of IMEC. Uh, so we have seen some articulations of how it will be, and as somebody pointed out, it's not about having an alternative trade route of sorts, but essentially having system which will facilitate easier movement of goods, maybe some investments along the way on existing infrastructure and whatnot. All of that is there. We understand that, but again, we hadn't seen any specifics to begin with for us to essentially make an argument about how this was going to be very transformational. Although I'm very skeptical of the idea that and skeptical of officials using the terminology game changer for any kind of transport corridor of sorts. It hasn't worked out that well for Pakistan, and I've been studying CPEC for a long time, and I know when somebody calls it a game changer, it doesn't always work out that way. So obviously, it can be that in a couple of years we might look back and see at IMEC as a failure of sorts. But I think that will probably also be because of the unprecedented nature of the conflict that is taking place right now in the region. So obviously, I would not like to lean in too much on either side of the debate here. I don't know enough about what's going to happen, but I think we all can say one thing for sure, that it was a demonstration of will. It was something about the intention that all these countries, which some people would not necessarily always see them together, picture them together, them coming along and making a huge thing out of it, right? Obviously, they wouldn't have done that if they didn't find the need or some positive side to that. So the fact that they did that, the fact that they did it at the G20, right? At a time when China, remember, was not there, right? I think it was a huge message, and I think India probably would have and probably took the lead, probably supported that message, right? So for that, I don't know whether it should be seen as an alternate to BRI. We've seen many alternates in the past, not really worked out in that sense. Some people would say even BRI has punched, has not punched above its weight, so to speak, or at least in the imagination it has punched above the weights, but actually not the reality on the ground is very different. But my main point is that at least there was an intention, there was willingness on all these sides for them to at least announce it, put some pressure on themselves. Obviously, I don't buy into the argument that the Hamas leadership looked at IMEC and that's what they decided to do, what they ended up doing. But obviously, I think some people still see IMEC as a sign of the Saudi leadership, right, and the Gulf leadership and the Arab leadership in general, thinking as that they could make peace with Israel and move on without addressing the Palestinian issue. So some people do frame it like that, but I think that's a post facto justification or explanation of what happened, and not something that Hamas would have thought of too much, in that sense. So they obviously wanted to. Their main goal was to blow up the normalization process, etc., because they were feeling squeezed out of the entire process. So that's one. But considering, I mean, coming back to your original question about Modi 2.0 in West Asia challenging China. I mean, I would say that China is, I mean, the kind of pool that China has in West Asia is often, uh, you know, uh, I mean, some would say that it's understated or underplayed, but I think it's kind of overestimated the amount of pull that they have in general. And I don't see India directly, trying to counter China in West Asia. But in terms of what India can do and is doing more proactively in terms of on countering China's influence, I think that is more probably in with relation to West Asia. It's probably more in the Western Indian Ocean and the larger Indian Ocean region. And I think there probably India will probably be more assertive. Again, just to remind everyone, countries like Sri Lanka, for that matter, which a lot of people wrote off as a country we had lost to China, right? uh, it has maybe India has remember I think the total sum amount of how much we provided in terms of line and credit aid of all kinds. I think that reaches to almost $4 billion. So that investment, which many people said at the time, remember there was this whole uh, episode about Chinese spy or satellite or research vessels coming to Indian Ocean, possibly docking in Sri Lanka, and that leading to a lot of pessimistic assessment about India-Sri Lanka ties, how that has changed now in the last couple of years. So all of that, and remember, China's failure to partake in actually ensuring that the Suez crisis of sorts, or what we are seeing in the Red Sea right now with the Houthis. I think some people would look at that and look at the kind of responsibility that India is taking, ensuring not just that its own vessel, but the general sea lines of communication remain open. I think some people will look at that and I think appreciate the kind of role India is playing in general for that region and the broader continent in general. So I think in terms of directly, obviously we're not going to counter China's influence in terms of money, but I think we have done enough to secure our interests, to ensure that countries in the region, especially the Gulf countries, led by the UAE and others. One thing we didn't touch upon UAE and whatnot is also one point that can be made that as I think Satwik pointed out this earlier, that UAE is one of the countries which took the lead, and it's Saudi Arabia which followed. Remember all those UAE wealth fund, etc., national wealth funds essentially investing in India, not just right now, but like 5 years ago. They were the one who took that lead, and now you see more enthusiasm and excitement on the Saudi side to invest more money in India through various private and governmental ventures. So I think India has done enough, or at least done enough to make sure that these countries don't go out of their way to do something which can be construed as uh, something being blatantly against Indian interests. And to that extent, I think India has managed to do that very well. But at the same time, I don't know, or I don't think India would like to be seen as representing a bloc per se in West Asia, because that complicates India's positions on many issues. And I think in that perspective, from that lens, India would not be like to be seen as being representative or being just a member of the Western Bloc in that region. I think India has done well on that front, but at the same time, I think the main primary ironically, even though United States has withdrawn from, that's the common perception. The United States has withdrawn from the region, and it definitely has in many ways. I think United States still remains the primary external actor in the region, and China is there. I mean, you may see them, facilitating some normalization or some talks and whatnot, especially in the context of what American image, what has happened to American image in recent months. But I don't think that they have that much pull for us to counter yet, right? So I think that part is also a bit overplayed. But I mean, we never know. In terms
Yeah.
of just maybe what we need to focus on is to maintain bilateral ties, build upon them, consolidate the gains that has already been made.
Yeah. I think the an illustrative example of this is the Chinese base in Djibouti. That when this initial base was built, everyone had basically been saying that China has entered the Indian Ocean, basically entered the Horn of Africa, and is entering East Africa, the whole Middle East region as a military power. And what this Houthi experience has shown is that this really has not translated to anything really substantial in terms of Chinese security forces really playing a role. And I think that is the most that kind of just goes to show that China's own commitments to the region are maybe flowing with money, but not really with steel.
Personally, I think to again, Rishabh has said most of this, so I'm not going to belabor the point too much. But I think China is actually getting played a lot more than people want it to be played, and that's sort of leading to this perception where everyone's desperate to sort of like quite literally prove that China is the next US in West Asia. And I think that's sort of interfering with a lot of objective analysis that needs to be done on the region. I'm not discounting Chinese power in the region, not at all, but I do think it's being overplayed by quite a significant margin. Because, and just want to end on this, because all things said and done, right? America is the big bad sugar daddy who can sail in with the aircraft carriers and just bomb a country into the storage, right? I understand the Chinese like to flash a lot of their military equipment online. And I also understand there are a lot of Indians who look at it and then instantly punch their balls and squeeze their phalluses because they also want one. But once again, there's a difference between being battle tested, even if you have to lose in places like Afghanistan, and clicking photographs and posting it on the internet. And I think that sort of needs to be understood in this situation.
Yeah, so I think we will leave it there for this session. Thank you, everyone. Abhivadan, can you inform the listeners where they can access this podcast?
Yep.
I'm sorry. I just have to come in very quickly. I like how Aditya just goes, "Okay, everyone, I'm done with this. Good night. Have a nice day. See you later."
No, no, because I was looking for a perfect line to end the session, and you kind of gave that like on a high note. So, so Abhivadan, can you inform the
Anyway,
listeners where they can
yeah,
access?
yeah, yeah. But from next time, Aditya will tell everyone where to find Bharat Pacific. But all of you can actually find Bharat Pacific on Spotify, YouTube, and obviously on X. You can also follow me at the rate Indistinct, because just a quick announcement, folks. We do this localized space on international relations topics every time, in every 2 to 3 weeks or 4 weeks, whenever time allows. But yeah, I will be continuing these spaces with Aditya as usual. At the same time, I'll be coming up with some monologues on tech and culture, but under my own handle, Indus Think. Again, that's another debate, that's another discussion. But yeah, you can find us on Google, YouTube, Spotify. Just search Bharat Pacific. And yeah, this recording will also be there shortly. We have not been posting due to some logistical issues, but we'll keep posting. So yeah, thank you everyone. I think, yeah.
Yeah, so we have three more parts to finish this series. So I think the fourth part next will be on India and Global South diplomacy. Timing, we are not sure, but I
Most
think the
probably
next will be
March.
Global South.
Most probably
Yeah,
March.
yeah,
Let's see. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So the fourth one will be Global South. Fifth one will be most perhaps Europe. And the
Hmm.
last one will be India, US, and perhaps, of course, whenever we discuss, China is already covered in the topic
Maybe Latin
accordingly.
America and Africa together. I don't know, but yeah.
No, no, global south. That's why, like, the
Hmm.
whole global south involves Latin America, Africa. That's why I would like
Perhaps. Yeah.
some. Yeah. Okay. So thank you everyone for joining.